Good morning. This is Faith in Our Hometown, brought to you as a community service and sponsored by Mercy Hospital, Joplin. And now, here's your host, Father Jay Friedel.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you're enjoying this spring morning. But thanks for joining us for another Sunday morning of Faith in Our Hometown, our weekly conversation with each other about things that affect us as people of faith here in the greater Joplin area. One of those things that we've done a few shows about this before, but recently some of our Baptist brothers and sisters have been in the news, like I know what that's like, having been in the news for all of a sudden realizing, oh my gosh, this has occurred in our denomination, this has occurred in our churches. I didn't want to bring somebody on, to talk about that from the Baptist church. I didn't want anybody to feel like they were being attacked or pointed out or anything. But what I wanted to do this morning was I wanted to bring somebody on who is familiar with child abuse in all the different ways and places it's occurred. And so I turned to one of our former guests again, Aryn Crawford. Aryn works at the Advocacy Center, and Aryn is going to be with us to talk a little bit about the areas where child abuse occurs. So we're going to be right back after this Mercy Minute. Don't go away.
The dreaded tagged photo. I married the love of my life in October, and when I got home that night, I saw this. Frankly, this is every obese person's worst nightmare. You have no control, none, over what other people post. And up until that day, I'd been very careful about how I presented myself on social media. In fact, I generally only posted photos like this. What's sad is that I haven't always been like this. Confession, I've been a yo-yo dieter for roughly 10 years. When I met this amazing guy 3 years ago, he didn't care how much I weighed, but he did care about my health. A month after our wedding, I talked to my doctor and my journey began. Here's an honest and usually pretty entertaining look at how I got to bariatric surgery and beyond. Buckle up, check out my blog, Confessions of a Yo-Yo Dieter.
Well, thanks for joining us for another Sunday morning. We are right here with Aryn Crawford this morning, and we are talking about areas where sexual abuse occurs. So Aryn, you're with the Children's Center, which is our local child advocacy group, okay? And because of that, you see where it all happens. And so I don't want to throw my Baptist brothers and sisters under the bus. I don't want to throw myself under the bus any more than I have to, but I mean, it's occurred in the Catholic Church, it's occurred in the Baptist churches, it's occurred in the Methodist Church, it's occurred in the Episcopal Church, it's occurred every single church we've got out there. At some point in time, it's occurred. And that's why I wanted you to come on this morning to again remind everybody about some of the things we need to look out for and some of the things that we need to heighten our awareness of as we go, because I didn't want to put anybody onto the spot from the Baptist church and say, well, why did you guys do this? Because I know what that's like. And I know that we're not the only ones that, yes, it happened under our watch. It did. And it happened, of course, obviously, as is now been, it's happened under everybody's watch. So can you speak to that a little bit again so that, you're the expert. You guys deal with the kids that it's happened to.
Sure, and you're right about that. There's no one in particular that needs to be in the hot seat because child sexual abuse can happen in any place and in any time. And in any type of organization. It can happen in churches, whether they're Catholic or Baptist or any other kind. It can happen in schools, it can happen in nonprofit organizations, at universities, government agencies, any place where people gather together, abuse can take place. And so that may make some people feel afraid. It may kind of spread some paranoia. But what our recommendation is at the Children's Center is that it should spread preparedness and it should spread awareness. And a leader in an organization may not be able to control whether or not an incident occurs, but they can control how they respond to it. So we just want to recommend that everyone prepare themselves, whether that's through policy or through education, to handle that well if it does come up.
Yeah, because I think, it's like I tell my folks, because we have to screen, of course, all our volunteers, and then we gotta, unfortunately, because we have been in the limelight so much, we were forced to make sure that our programs are so much better protected than they ever were before, because we don't want it to happen again. And in doing that, we've learned so much. But when I tell all our volunteers who come to do the training, I'm just like, you're not here because we suspect you, but you're here because you're supposed to be part of the safety net that if we're all watching each other and we're all watching all the time and we all take some precautions that we just have to follow regularly and at all times, if we do all those things, the incidence of somebody slipping in the cracks is a whole lot less than if we're really on our game the whole time.
That's right, and it's about transparency. Like you said, it's not about pointing fingers, but about everyone coming together to look at what the issues could be and look at safety issues. I'm glad you mentioned a safety net. We talk about a safety net sometimes when we're talking about mandated reporting, that mandated reporting is in place to create a safety net for kids when they're coming in contact with school and church and daycare and after school programs, that a safety net is many points of contact instead of just one. And so the flip side of the fact that any organization or group can be the setting for child sexual abuse is that any organization can be the place where a child is rescued from that. Any place can be the place where a child chooses to tell, or a place where adults who are looking on and who are watchful can detect something dangerous that's happening.
Yeah. Now, we just made it through sexual abuse awareness month, okay? So we're a little past it now, and now that we're in May, that was April. So what are some of the things that you guys were doing during this month to, again, raise this profile so that we can be part of the solution rather than by our not seeing or not knowing or not even knowing what to look for, we're part of the problem before?
Sure. So we spend April every year trying to get the word out to everyone to really raise some awareness in our communities about child abuse and to promote kind of the prevention of child abuse. You probably saw some pinwheel gardens around Joplin in April. Those are set up by businesses and organizations who support our work at the Children's Center and who support children. And we really just wanted to do that to show that the entire town is thinking about child abuse. We also held the Breaking the Silence 5K and 10K in April on the 20th. And that event is really to create a community of people who support child victims of sexual abuse and the victims themselves, to kind of show them that it's a community of people, that no one is alone in that experience, and kind of let them build each other up in strength and encouragement. So that event went very well. Throughout April and throughout the entire year, one kind of primary goal of mine is to promote some of the education and some of the training that we offer at the Children's Center. I think awareness isn't much without education. You can.
Well, you don't know what you're looking for. You don't know what to do.
Right. You can see some blue pinwheels and maybe feel sad about children being abused, but that really isn't enough for us. What we want is for people to invite us into their churches and organizations and schools to offer some of that education that can create, kind of turn that awareness into action.
Yeah. So I know you do, and we've talked about this on a previous show, but I just want to give you a little chance to make sure, because I think the program is really, really important. And that is, we've got so many things that are mandated for us now, just because we've got the program and we've got our training set up and we've got all that stuff set up. But some of our smaller churches may not have a large group like ours to belong to and don't have the same resources. But you guys do some training for churches and those kinds of things, again, to make sure that that everybody knows what to look for. Again, the problem is that in some cases, if people excuse me, if people didn't know what to look for, they didn't know in some of these instances what was going on, with, all pastors at this point in time should be trained never to be alone with kids, Right. So what kind of training do you do for the churches so that folks can kind of get, their minds more wrapped around how to be that safety net?
Sure. Well, I go out and visit churches really often to do some policy consultation and just visit with leadership in churches to shore up those policies, make sure that they're updated and that they're effective. I like to go into a church and ask them what their needs are and what their desires are for that child protection policy. And then we can talk through the mandated reporter piece of that everyone understands their legal obligation to report child abuse, but also that obligation is set on a foundation of more of a moral obligation.
Oh yeah, and that's what I was just going to say.
Right.
Even if you don't fit, and I say this to my volunteers all the time, even if you do not fit the legal definition of who a mandated reporter is, I still think There's not an adult out there in this day and age who does not fit the moral mandated reporter, because if we find out or we see or we suspect, we've got to express those concerns. Okay. It's not in expressing those concerns that got us in so much trouble, I think, for so long. Every time I watch our training tape, and I'm watching this family whose life was torn apart in their parish because the priest was molesting their daughter. And after the whole thing came to light, they looked at the dad and they said, yeah, we thought there was something funny going wrong. And he just said, well, why didn't anybody say anything before? Mm. And again, the pain in that father's voice and the pain in that father's face, and God help the child and the pain that she went through. I mean, you look at that and you go, ugh. It just gets me every time, because we need to communicate those concerns. We need to figure out how to help people to get past that barrier. Oh, I wouldn't want to say anything that might be, I'm not sure. So how do we do all those things?
Yeah. For leadership in churches, it's such an important responsibility to create an atmosphere and an environment where people feel like they can voice concerns. Right. In any type of organization, there's fear of offending people, there's fear of angering people in power, or saying something that might cause some repercussions for yourself. But there are ways that you can create an environment where any concern is welcome. Mm-hmm. And in churches specifically, I think that there's something to be said about creating an environment where issues about surrounding sexuality and sex can be brought up. I think a lot of times in churches, that sort of thing isn't brought up because of some kind of discomfort, some kind of feeling of moratorium on the topic of sex. And so that's kind of a double-tier thing for churches, where we want to invite any concern to be voiced, but we also want to let people know we understand that sexual abuse happens. And in order to report a concern about sexual abuse, you may have to mention sex. And so I think that's another really important dynamic of that for churches in particular.
Yeah, and it's a challenge. Because again, it's like we always say, one of the reasons why we are so guardful about, sexuality and personhood and all those things is because it matters. Every person's dignity is their dignity, and you want that elevated to the level where it's still an ideal, and it's still what we'd want for ourselves and all those who are dear to us. And so, we do hold it in a high esteem, and we try not to cheapen it or degrade it. But I think that sometimes you're right, the silence keeps us from being able to do that. My guest this morning is Aryn Crawford from the Children's Center, which is our local child advocacy center. And we're talking about the scourge, if you will, of child sexual abuse. So we're going to be right back after this, short break. So don't go away. Just grab a quick warmer for your coffee and come right on back.
You're watching Faith in Our Hometown on KSN TV, brought to you as a community service of Mercy Hospital, Joplin.
Well, again, thanks for joining us for another Sunday morning. My guest this morning, Aryn Crawford, from the Children's Center, which is our local child advocacy center. And Aryn's been talking with us about child sexual abuse. And especially I asked her to come in and talk a little bit about, especially for those of us who belong to places where we practice faith or we do those things. Sometimes we got some goofy groupthink about some of that. We were just talking about that before we came to the break. Right. Like not wanting to talk about sexuality because, it's private and, those things. It's just like, okay, but we still got to talk about some of those things. Let's talk a little bit about, how we do report those concerns. How do we talk about those things? How do we deal with it when we've discovered that something has happened? Because again, I can share tons of, what's happened over the course of the last 60 years here in our own territory in southern Missouri, what's happened with the Catholic Church. But this is everywhere and everybody. So what are some of your words of advice to some of those congregations who might not always know how to deal with this when they discover it's happening or something. If say it's a parent or a volunteer or even a minister in the congregation, or to the congregation, and something is not right, how do you suggest people begin to deal with that?
Well, the first step in any type of organization, when there's an allegation of sexual abuse or there's a concern that something may be happening that's dangerous, is to resist the impulse to conduct an internal investigation. Internal investigations happen in all kinds of organizations, and they have there's a lot of problems associated with that. If something comes up and there's an allegation in a church, for instance, and the leadership in that church decides to kind of give in to that impulse and think we have to figure out exactly what happened, we have to know all the facts before we let any of this information get out about the church, those problems will occur for the child concerned and for any other investigation that might happen. So the first step is to understand who needs to be involved. And who needs to be involved in a case of child sexual abuse is the Missouri Child Abuse Hotline that goes out to the Children's Division and would make them aware of the allegations at their office, and then also the local law enforcement. Those folks are specifically trained to investigate these issues. They're the ones most likely to get to the bottom of what has actually happened. If the leadership at a church or any organization is really interested in the truth, that is the path to take through those organizations that are in place to find out what the truth is. So that's the first piece of advice that I have, is to defer to those experts who can investigate.
And I'm just going to tell you from from loads of experience that we've had, you will lose every time you try to do that for yourself, because you cannot, in the eyes of anybody who's looking at you from the outside, you cannot seem impartial about your own group or about what's happening in your own place. That's why you got to hand it over to the law enforcement agencies. Just hand it over, let them deal with it, and that way you're not going to ever at least be accused of saying, well, you just did this to cover it up, or you just did this to take care of yourself, or you just did this to minimize the damage.
Right.
If you just turn it over to the law enforcement authorities and the people who have the expertise in the area, you're going to be a whole lot better off. In terms of, again, as you said, which I think number one is finding out the truth, but even even when that truth is ugly, at least it can't hurt you in terms of the other thing, which would be the sadness of trying to cover it up, and pretend it didn't happen.
That's right. And, internal investigations can kind of come in several flavors, because, some may be with good intentions. Some people may really want to know the truth, but going through that process in-house causes trouble anyway. Unfortunately, there are times when internal investigations are motivated by a desire to cover something up. Protecting reputations is something that gets tied into these allegations sometimes. I know that in situations where people have jumped from place to place, abusing children in their wake along the way, it's because they've been let go from churches or organizations really quietly. An organization goes, we don't want our name associated with this problem, so we are going to quietly allow you to resign. But what that person is going to do is move on to the next place and find more children to victimize.
And we just, gosh, we learned so much about people who do these things because of what their behavior has, how it's wreaked havoc in so many different ways and in different areas. And again, this is the thing that I just kept saying to people, we don't want anybody to, we want that associated with us. It's just like, a crime's been committed and a kid was involved. How do you not, how do you not, give that over to law enforcement? Yeah. It's like, and I feel the same way about when it happens in families.
Sure.
I think that, when those kind of crimes have been committed, I think we are long past the days of, everybody has a crazy Uncle Harold, and we just know to keep our kids away from him.
Right.
But I think Harold also needs to understand that if you touch one of them, you're going to get prosecuted and you're going to jail. I don't care if you're my uncle.
Right. And even if you keep your own kids away from Harold, he's going to find a kid. So when we go, this person is being ejected from our church and we're going to keep our kids safe, there are other kids that person is going to find. to victimize. So, and I can tell, we were talking about reputation and not wanting to be kind of identified with a problem or associated with it, but I can tell you what you really don't want to be associated with is any kind of effort to keep a crime quiet or to cover something up. The repercussions of that for an organization are almost never ending. And so to me, from my perspective, if an organization said, hey, we are turning this report of concern over, we want the best for everyone involved, we're not jumping to conclusions, but we want to keep people safe and do this the right way, that's what you want to be associated with. Somebody who's handling things the right way morally and the right way legally.
Yeah, I'll just give you a little, for instance, we recently, within the last few months, have had to, we went back through all of our files, and looked at all the things for the last 60 years that we've had. And there was one thing that came in a long time ago. I'm probably now, 15 years ago, something like that, or no, it wasn't that long ago. But the thing was, the person didn't even want to pursue it. They didn't want to say anything. And so we didn't feel like we could do anything with it. It was just kind of like, what are we going to do? Well, when we went back through the files, we did, at that point in time, go, we've turned over all these others. We probably pro forma should have turned that one over too, even though we couldn't do anything with it, Person was no longer a minor. It was an adult bringing a, concern from, whatever. And it was just like, so we did, and we received a lot of heat from it because we said, point blank, if we don't know what else to do with this, we're still going to have to turn it over to the prosecutor. We never did that. So we're going to turn it over, let the prosecutor decide whether to do anything. And so now, the deal is, how do we deal with, again, once that investigation's done, how then do we deal with, trying to reinstate this priest's reputation, or how are we going to go the other route? And now, if we find out more. Okay, but we couldn't find out anything. So it's just kind of like, and so again, everybody's looking at us go, how could you do that to him? Or how could you do that? And it's just like, all we've said is that the process is that you go on administrative leave and you stay on administrative leave until that part of the investigation is finished. And if there's nothing else is found, okay, then we figure out how to bring you back and to do those things. But if something is found, we got to do that. And we got to get more used to that as a society, because again, we didn't want to do anything a long time ago because it was like, okay, but we're not sure, and this is something that happened in the 70s. So what do we do? Right. It's tough. It's just, all these things are tough, and they're hard decisions to make on the ground when you're trying to sort through all this stuff.
Yeah. And I think one thing that I would say to that is, no one inside of organizations or outside in the system is attempting to accuse someone or get someone in trouble for something that they didn't do. What we're all interested in is finding out what actually happened. There would be no motivation for anyone, certainly in kind of that investigation system, to try to get someone in trouble if they don't need to be in trouble. Because what that would mean for us is there's someone else who committed this crime that isn't in trouble, and that's the person that we're really looking for.
After her. Yeah.
I think treating people fairly after an allegation is really important, because I think the more people see that, the more likely they will be to make reports. If we can
That's a good point.
treat people fairly and say, we're not going to drag anybody out of town and ruin their reputation right off the bat. We just want to be fair, and we want to get to the bottom of it. People may be more likely to report.
Has that been your experience? Because first of all, we haven't had a whole lot since, the early 2000s. We just haven't had a lot of reports. Because again, we tightened we changed the way that we do things. We changed the way that we work with volunteers. We changed the way that we do business. There's no such thing as business as the old way. We just don't do it that way. But how many of you worked with that where people have actually been found and exonerated and had to be kind of restore their reputation? Have you had any luck with that?
As far as cases that we're working at the Children's Center, I can't give you a number of cases where that has happened. We do know that kids very rarely make allegations of sexual abuse that turn out to be false.
Yep.
That's very uncommon. As far as restoring reputations, I think, that's up to the community altogether to understand that we're looking for truth. We're not looking to run people out on a rail.
Yeah, and again, I applaud you, Aryn, and I thank you for what you do on behalf of the community. I do think there's got to be some people, for all of us, for families, for for churches, for civic organizations. There's got to be somebody in there who tries to take that impartial look and to come in and to do that work and to do the assessment and help us to find the truth. And again, I thank you on behalf of the community for what you do. My guest this morning, Aryn Crawford from the Children's Center, which is a local child advocacy center, talking to us about child sexual abuse. So we're going to be right back after this Mercy Minute. Stick around.
You don't realize how much weight you put on until it's gone. I'm Katie Dahl. I work in the emergency room at Mercy Joplin. I'm a nurse. I've been there for 8 years. I love my job. I think I have the best job in the world because I get to take care of people every single day. I had gastric bypass surgery almost a year ago. I have lost a total of 130 pounds. 30 pounds I lost before surgery with diet and exercise. It's not been easy. The surgery definitely has helped it come off easier, but I still have to, watch what I eat, still have to exercise. I have a lot more energy. I can move around. My body doesn't ache anymore like it used to. I was pre-diabetic and now my blood sugars are all good and I'm not worried about being pre-diabetic anymore. I feel like I was when I was younger in high school and in my teenage years, just getting back to where I feel comfortable in my own skin now.
One of the sad realities of the world we live in, and it really has been a sad reality throughout time, is that unfortunately people in positions of power will take advantage of people who are in positions that are not. And unfortunately, when that happens between a child and an adult, those scars last for a long, long time and really affect people's lives in so many horrible ways. Child sexual abuse has been around for a long time, and it affects families, it affects churches, it affects organizations, it affects everyone. We need to continue to talk about this in a way that we get more comfortable in knowing that it's around, and we got to get more comfortable in the ways that we protect our kids. We got to get more comfortable in the ways that we try to safeguard the environment. We need to get more comfortable in the ways that we will express our discomfort with just identifying things that make us uncomfortable. I keep telling moms, use that sixth sense. To grandmas, yes, pay attention to that and just express those concerns. We've got to get better at this. And folks like the Child Advocacy Center are good at helping us to do that in each in our own sphere of influence. So I would just say, if we love our community and we love our kids and we love our faith, we've got to do much better at protecting them. So let's do our best. Let's come back next week. Join us for another week at Faith in Our Hometown.
Thanks for watching. Faith in Our Hometown can be seen Sunday mornings at 6:30 and 9 a.m. on KSN. Brought to you as a community service and sponsored by Mercy Hospital, Joplin.